We're going through the content on the Tableau Certified Data Analyst exam, and in this video we're looking at Tableau Prep, pivoting your data. And so here are the things we're going to discuss with pivots. We're going to discuss columns to rows or rows to columns. You can go either way, how to rename columns, and finally how to use a wildcard search to choose which field you want to pivot on. And so before we get into it, I'm going to just show you the documentation for Tableau Prep Pivot. I'm going to place a link under the video to this documentation. So now, pro tip, you can speed up or slow down the video as needed. Pivot options. The first thing to note is that you can choose whether you want to go from long to wide or wide to long. That is to say, from columns to rows, that's wide to long, or rows to columns, that's long to wide. You can go either way with your pivot. Also, you can choose how you want to rename the columns when you do your pivot, and you can use a wildcard search rather than choosing individual fields when you do your pivot. And we'll be looking at all of that as we move into our demo. So I'm going to pick up Tableau Prep here. I'm going to connect to a file that I want to use for this example. I'm going to do a text file. It's a little bit of a messy file, so I'm going to need to do a little bit in the input step to adjust it, and then I'll get on to doing my pivot. So here's the file, and the issue is that it's not recognizing the real header row, which is row 15. I think actually row 16 it's the row. This is the row because the data is in columns with a different column for each year. And so I'm going to say set header and then choose header row 16. And so now I have, let's see, is it 16 or 15? Let's try 15. Yeah, now I see the year in the row. And so I'm going to take that and data start on row 17. I think that looks good. I may want to do more adjustments later, but that looks pretty good for my first step. And now I'm going to do a cleaning step. And I'm going to rename this column to geography. And filter out the null values. So I'm going to do filter null values. Let's keep only non-null values. So now that I've done, and I think also I want to remove an individual value. So I'm going to do, let's see if I can I exclude this as well? That looks like a garbage row there, something that's not really data. And so the rest of it looks good, I think. And now I'm ready to do my pivot step, because what I don't like here is that I have these dates as columns, right? So the year of the data is listed in a separate column, and I'd rather have one row for each year. So I'm going to pivot from columns to rows. And to do that, I'm going to click this plus button and then do a pivot. Here I'm looking at the option to do a wildcard search, but since these don't actually have common characters, so I see 19 and 20 as the beginning, since it's both dates in the 2000s and in the century before, right, the 1900s, the 1980s, 1970s, I can't actually use the wildcard. So instead of doing that, I'm just going to select the columns that I want. So I'm going to just go over here and just select all these, holding down Shift, and just drag them over, and that's going to make my pivot column. And I have the option automatically rename pivoted fields and values. If I want, I can say year here, and then I can just have this as my, so I've got the year, and then this is going to be the number of violent crimes. So I'm going to rename that. Oops, I removed it instead of renaming, so I'm Control Z. So now I rename as number of crime, or violent crimes, I think is better. And I think, again, I'm going to probably exclude these null values. I think that this is just, we don't have any data for DC for some years, I guess. So I'm going to exclude that. there we have it. So now we have a data set that is, instead of being a very wide data set, it's a long data set with 3 columns. It's got the year, the violent crimes, and the geography. So that's the next step. Now I'm going to go in the other direction and show how we could unpivot it. So if we want to take it from long to wide, we can select the rows to columns option. This is going to be the column. This is going to be the field that will pivot from rows to columns. We're going to drag it over. And then each year will again become its own column. And we see the field used to aggregate the new columns is missing. So we need to add our violent crimes, the field that's actually used to populate those columns. So it's going to give us the total number of violent crimes for each year by geography. And this is just what we had before, aside from the fact that the geography is now at the end. I can move it over to the beginning. But we're essentially undoing the previous step because we went from columns to rows and then back from rows to columns. So we can just drag this back to the beginning since I think it makes the most sense to have the geography all the way on the left. That is it for pivoting in Tableau Prep.